My name's Ed Waken, and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, and I moved there 20 years ago to start a movement of churches that would hopefully infect the whole city, the state, and go as far as God wanted it to take it. You know, when I first got to Phoenix, I thought, how am I going to meet people? And so I loved American football, and so I went to the local high school and I said, hey, do you need a coach? I played football in high school, and he said, yeah, we could use a coach. So I started coaching and talking to the players, talking to the coaches, and I identified a couple of people that I thought these people are more open to the love of God than the others, but it happened to be none of those that God brought me to. It was a guy named John who, after practice, he came to every practice to watch his son play in practice, and after practice one day they went in to shower and get changed. He was waiting for his son. And I started talking with John, and we were on the 50-yard line of the football field. And John was talking to me about how his company was going to let him go and he was going to lose his job. And I just listened to him. And I said, John, would it be okay with you? I don't know if you're a man of prayer, but can I pray for you? He said, sure. So I put my arm around him right there on the 50-yard line of the football field, and I prayed that God would help him to find a job or keep his job. So the next couple of days he came back and said, you'll never guess what? God answered your prayers. I go, what happened? He said, I get to keep my job. In fact, they gave me a different job, so it's got a long-term relationship with this company. And so he said, that's just great. He said, can you pray about my marriage? I said, sure I can. I'll pray about your marriage. And we started talking, and then we started reading the Bible together. We read James 5 times in a week, and John had never read the Bible before. And I remember his uncle died, and he said, can you go with me to the hospital? It was just before he died, and visit my uncle. I said, sure I can. So as we were driving to the hospital, John was recounting to me what James 1 was about, and James 2 was about, and James 3, James 4, James 5. He couldn't believe all the things. He says, I really need to learn to watch what I say, and that James has so much to talk about my tongue. And so from that, he started hanging out with us on Wednesday nights when we were meeting, and then he brought his wife and his son and his 2 daughters, and that was a long time ago, and John is still part of what we're doing. He's still reading the Bible. And so in our churches, as we gather together, we do one thing all the time. We have a meal. We're always eating. But out of that meal then flows different things. So if you've known much about organic church, we talk about the DNA of church. And in this context of anywhere from 5 to 15 folks, we want to have the divine truth. We want to have conversations about God's word and what God is doing in our lives. We want to have nurturing relationships. We want to be practicing the one another's throughout the week in our gathering together over meals, telling stories, helping each other fix things, words of encouragement, just the whole gamut of what the one another's are. And we want to have the A of the DNA, the apostolic mission. We want together to be praying for one another for lost people. We want together to be playing golf with lost people, watching movies with lost people, having barbecues with lost people, prayer walking neighborhoods, asking God to raise up people to come to Christ. So we do these 3 things, but we most often don't do them all in one evening. So some nights you might come to our house church and we'll have dinner together, and we'll sit around, 8, 10 people around a table, sharing some meal that we brought or a potluck that we brought, and we'll just tell stories about this week, what God's been doing, struggles that we have, problems that we have, enjoyments that we have, our sports teams that are losing or winning, whatever comes up in life. And then we'll pray and go home, and you'll think, well, all you had is a fellowship group. And that would be right that night. But you might come the next week and we'd have dinner together. We might share some stories, and then somebody might say, hey, I have a question out of this book in 1 Corinthians. I don't understand what this means. And we'll spend the whole evening talking about the question out of 1 Corinthians. And you might say, this is just a Bible study. And that night you'd be right. And then you might come another night, we'd have dinner, and then we might go prayer walking in the neighborhood and come back and have a list of people that are close to coming to Christ and just beg God for their souls. And you might say, this is nothing but an evangelistic group. And that night you'd be right. And then a 4th night you might come and we would have dinner. We would move to the living room. We would sing some songs. We would open up the Bible. We would have a chat about what God is saying to us. We would pray for lost people. We would pray for each other. And you'd say, oh, you're having church. And you'd be right. So over a time of 3 months, 2 months, 6 months, we want to just see the DNA, the divine truth, the nurturing relationships, and the apostolic mission in balance over that time, figuring out where we might be weak, strengthening that weakness so we become more balanced. And if that's happening, then new life is going to come out of that. Recently, we have a couple that came to us, really got reconnected to God. They had been disenfranchised from the church. They spent about a year with us, growing in their faith, learning about church in an organic way, making disciples, and then they got a job change back to Boston, which is the area that they're from. So we just blessed them and sent them back to Boston, and they've already begun making disciples, starting a church that will branch into multiple churches. And so because we've been praying and seeking God from that, this is happening. Simultaneous to that, just the next week, one of our couples came and said, we want to start a church in our neighborhood. This guy is brand new to Jesus. He was just baptized with his 2 kids a few weeks earlier, and he started a church in his neighborhood with friends and people that are just broken lives, that are messed up. He hardly knows much, but he knows that Jesus changed his life and is transforming him, and he wanted to give that to others. And so out of this one church that some of these people have been together for 5, 6, 8 years, now 2 new churches just recently have been birthed out of it because we've been practicing the divine truth, nurturing relationships, and apostolic mission. So I think I'd answer it 2 ways. The couple that went back to Boston, they went intentionally because of their job change to make disciples and see churches emerge. That is really their passion, and they want to see that multiply throughout all of New England because that's where they're from, that's where their heart is. But this new believer that came to Christ just a few months ago, he just wants to love people. He just wants to give away what he has. He probably knows church is going to be emerging, but I don't think he said, I'm going to start a church. He just said, I want to love people and give them what they have. So it happens both ways. And it's so, doing organic church is very, very simple. It's Jesus in the midst of people to be on his mission. I mean, it doesn't get any simpler than that. As they love each other. I've been doing church this way for almost 20 years. And I'm not looking for the next fad. I'm not looking for the next book that talks about a new method. I'm not looking to how to put more into people. I want to continue to draw out of people what God already has put in them. And if it's this simple and it's this life transforming, why would I want to be something more and to release people to do it naturally? Now, simple does not mean easy. I just want to be really clear about that. Simple means really messy. It means when you love much, you're going to get hurt much. I remember the church that we had come from in Southern California, there was a man who sat in the same seat of the same pew every Sunday with the same suit on. I knew his name, and I knew he golfed, and I knew nothing else about him. And I was there for 8 years. And I never want to see that happen again. And so when I never got hurt by him because I never knew anything about him and he knew nothing about me. And so I want to know the people that I'm in community with, and I want to know where they have fears and they have sorrows and struggles and where they're struggling with moving forward for the purpose of them to be moving out, to be the competent minister of the new covenant that God has called them to be. And so when you know people well, you're going to get hurt deeply. And the answer to hurt is to love more. Most people say, when I'm hurt, I'm going to close my hand. And they say, God, protect me, but I want more of you. And God says, you have to open your hand if you're going to have more of me. And they said, no, I don't want to. And God says, I can't put anything in, it's too protected, but I want more of you. Well, then open your hand. Well, if I open my hand, you might take something away. I might. If I open my hand, you might rearrange things. I could do that. But if you open your hand, I might give you more. Do I know what's best for you? Yeah. Then open your hand. Well, that hurts. And so what I tell people is this is safe, or it feels safe, but it brings death. It brings atrophy, It brings isolation. Proverbs 18 says, the man who isolates himself argues against all sound wisdom. But if you open your hand, it feels like death, but it's actually life and life-giving. And then God can rearrange, take away, add more. Sometimes that happens again and you get hit, you get slammed, and it hurts deeply. But I want to encourage you to keep your hand open and trust the Holy Spirit to guide you and to protect you. Jesus was hurt, Moses was hurt, Paul was hurt, David was hurt. They were all betrayed, and yet they kept going for God, and that's what we need to do as well.